Now, the race is on for the leadership of the next National Assembly. Several contenders are in the ring for the President of the Senate, including Godswill Akpabio, Ali Ndume, and David Umahi. All hail from different geopolitical zones in the country. And the issue of zoning has dominated discussions in the build-up to the 10th National Assembly.
Arise analyst Dr. Sam Amadi and politics editor Sumner Sambo join us now for an in-depth analysis on this. Well, gentlemen, good to see you.
Thank you.
Yes, where do we start from now? Sani Musa, yes, those are the contenders that you see right there, about 10 of them for the Senate presidency. Of course, Barao Jibrin is there, Abdulaziz Yari, whose name seems to be, you know, coming up more and more lately. Of course, Ojiuzo Kalu making that argument that it is the turn of the Southeast for the next Senate president. Of course, Osita Izunaso is also there. Godswill Akpabio, South-South. David Umahi, also Southeast. Ali Ndume, surprising one, I guess. Well, we'll find out. Adams Oshomole, of course, he's a senator-elect, one of the new entrants into the 10th National Assembly. Ahmed Lawan is the present Senate president, and he's also in contention. Dr. Sam Amadi, let's take it from there.
Well, I think heavy hitters. I mean, everybody here, those who don't have current experience, like Adam Oshobon, who is a first-timer, freshman senator. Apart from him, everybody here has a lot of gravitas. So what you see here is the game of the oldies, if you like it. If you look at them, almost half or more of the former governors are governors, or living, those who are appointed governors and existing the governorship. Again, people like Ndume have been in this race several times. This is probably the third time that Ali Ndume will make a bid, serious bid for the Senate presidency. He was a strong contender in the last Senate, or the current Senate. I think three issues to first flag here. Clearly, we will not expect any upset in terms of the opposition parties, getting this. This is not going to happen. It's more likely in the House, where the margin is that is much closer. So it's going to be an APC game. The second point here is zoning comes in here, and essentially this should be, all this being equal, a race between South-South and Southeast, as the APC governors have said, and most likely Akpabio himself and maybe against Ojiuzo Kalu. Now, those two contenders are strong in the sense that they are both senior senators, okay? Ojiuzo Kalu is current chief whip, which was 2 steps to the Senate presidency. So he is the person who occupies the highest office now in the Senate. And so probably he would also be running on his performance as chief whip and the political capital he has built around it. Akpabio, former senator, minister, twice governor, who has a lot of clout.
Former minority whip.
Former minority whip, so you can see he has a lot of credential. Now, the big question is, will the party stick to what seems reasonable, which is that this Senate must come from the South, and most likely, or obviously not Southwest, but it's going to be Southeast and South-South. Now, the North is making a strong pitch here. And what may play to them might be the sense that the president, which is the big job, comes for the South. The next big job after the presidency is the Senate president. And so the argument could be to balance geopolitically, But then what is a killer to that argument is that you have a president and a vice who are of the same religious faith, which was pushed back a lot, but got through in the elections, as it is now. And so the question then is, if you go to if you look at all the major contenders from the North, they are all of the same faith. So you're going to have the oddity, the provoking oddity of a Muslim president, Muslim vice president, Muslim Senate president. That would be too much change, too much, to push through the eye of a needle, as it were. And so I think that the late rally of Northern candidates, especially a strong candidate like Barao Jibrin, very strong, and incumbent Lawan, may not really pass muster, especially with the possible consequence of the action. So I would, for now, put my bet around two very senior persons. Isinaso would have been a breath of fresh air here. A senior senator, but not a former governor, with perhaps more of the youth age on his side, more of the, maybe pleasantness. But this is a brutal game, and maybe the old guys. Adam Shomole, strong, because former chairman of the party, whose camp is not the presidency, could be a good, good feel, true. But again, no experience. This is fresh senator. Even there's a convention that the Senate can overlook, but essentially it's a strong convention, especially when you're running against such heavy hitters like Akpabio or Jose Carlo. I might say maybe Akpabio could have an edge here.
Let me bring in Sumner here. Sumner, good to see you. You know, one of the key things here, listening to Dr. Amadi, is the carefulness that must be applied in trying not to bring in the religious, angle again, because time was when in this country you had a president who was also a Christian, and the Senate president, the speaker, and nothing of that kind of argument. Speak to us about, history not repeating itself, and looking at the geopolitical zones and the statutes or the rule book of the National Assembly concerning ranking members.
All right. One important thing that must be considered here is that the job of electing presiding officers in the National Assembly lies directly in the hands of the elected federal lawmakers, that's the senators and the House of Rep members. So that right does not belong to the party, neither does it belong to us Nigerians. Generally, we can only just share opinions on that. So the second thing I would want to point out is that the Constitution clearly states that members of the House have the capacity, the right to choose among themselves. And so there has been that confusion as to whether ranking is something that should be talked about when there's a constitutional right that actually guarantees that every lawmaker that comes into the federal parliament has a right to be elected and then to stand, to be elected in the process of being voted for, and then the person has a right to vote for another person. So if that particular lawmaker has that inherent right from the Constitution, then where does the issue of ranking come in? We've borrowed this presidential system and started using it since 1979. Sometimes it's become very controversial. And when this controversy arises as to whether the issue of ranking is such that can be put at power with the Constitution, then you see a lot of confusion actually coming in. But the tradition of Parliament globally has always been that the issues of ranking should take precedence. Now, when you come to the issues of religion too that you talked about, the Constitution does not look at it from that perspective, or even the issues of ethnicizing the presiding officer. So as far as the Constitution is concerned, it is blind to the issues of religion, it is blind to the issues of zoning, it is blind to the issues of ethnicity. So it is who the senators or House of Rep members decide to vote for on that day that will eventually emerge, because this same Constitution gives the senators and the House of Rep members the power to regulate their own activities. So as we go into the 10th National Assembly, the issues of consensus building has to be reached. Now, the president-elect seems to be coming into that talk to say that he would love a situation where there is that, clear guidance to the lawmakers as they go to Parliament that day to elect their presiding officer, so that we do not have a Muslim ticket issue coming up right there. But the reality is that the issues are beyond the president-elect, because the senators have a mind of their own, and the Constitution gives them a backing. So we can only keep appealing to them to understand the complexities of the nation and not to jeopardize the little things that bind us together. That's why you would have seen that the senators from the Northwest are insisting. They want to push someone like Jibrin Barau, and they are insisting that having had the highest number of votes that came to the president-elect from that geopolitical zone, they feel that one of them should come in. But look at how the composition of the nation is at this point. Would it be okay if we have a Muslim president, a Muslim vice president, and then another Muslim, Senate president, the number 3 position of the country? Well, it is not good for us, but I can tell you that constitutionally, there's nothing that prevents it from happening. But if we continue on that pedestal, we'll have a problem. And that's why there's been this talk on those northern senators to pipe down a little bit low and see how senators from the south can come forth. But if you look at the likes of Senator Akpabio, Senator Oju Zokalu, and their troubles with the anti-graft agencies, you also know that they have huge challenges ahead of them. And that's why I see some people are prepping others like Senator Izunaso, and then even newcomers like Senator Adams Oshomole, who is the senator-elect right now. He's not a full senator. And they are saying that that rule in the Constitution does not stop them from aspiring to this presiding officer's position, because the Constitution says that the senators or House of Rep members should elect one person among themselves. It did not specifically say a ranking member.
Right. Okay. Dr. Sam Amadi, I'd like you to respond to what Sumner Sambo just said there, considering what the Constitution says. Let me just start with this very, very quickly. It says in Section 50, subsection 1, there shall be a president and a deputy president of the Senate who shall be elected by the members of that house from among themselves. Every now and again we hear that the lawmakers are, they're primus inter pares, of course, first among equals. That's the Senate president, whoever it turns out to be. Is the Constitution really blind to religious or ethnic sentiments? And if we say that, because you're ranking or you're not ranking, you should be limited, would you not be limiting, the lawmaker, whether they are newbies or experienced, legislators?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, first, there is, we often like to talk Constitution. Constitution is not supposed to be a document for everyday affair. The Constitution of the U.S. does not prescribe for us who will be the speaker, how you have, the ranking officer you have. So in the U.S. Senate, they are ranking. Rarely will a fresher head committees like foreign affairs or finance committee appropriation. So those things are not unconstitutional. The Constitution cannot provide for you. 3 things clear. One is that the Constitution also talks about, I think, Section 60, gives National Assembly the power to make its procedure, its own rules. One of the first business of the day when the new National Assembly is inaugurated is actually to approve the rules that the bureaucracy provides. And so nothing will be unconstitutional if the Senate or National Assembly as a whole, stipulates ranking as a condition for election.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Yeah, nothing prescribed. That means nothing makes it, unconstitutional. Right. The Constitution simply says elect among yourself. You can lay out rules on how to do that. That's number 2. We're talking about convention, and essentially, I think I agree with Sumner. It's not about Constitution, what you have a right to do. It's about what you ought to do. The art of politics is art of possibilities. It's art of persuasion. So what we are saying is, how should the National Assembly constitute its leadership in the context of today's Nigeria? It seems to me that 3 things. One is overlooked, which is competence. National Assembly is actually a lawmaking institution. What kind of leadership does it have? I was a special advisor to Ken Namani, which was also a very successful Senate presidency. He was a first-timer, really. He got in there from 2004 thereabout to 2007. Okay, He did well, but the Senate themselves decided to elect him when they had a crisis. So each election is dependent on the context which we find ourselves. Again,
is the personality also a factor?
Yes, the context determining who should be the Senate president. So in this case now, I would argue that, look, because of the experience we've had in the past with the current National Assembly, maybe we need for somebody who's more dynamic, who can have the independence of mind to lead the Senate in a co-management framework, not antagonistic to the presidency, but what to say, co-managing and therefore independent. The second issue, like someone said, is it matters for diversity. Look, the presidency and National Assembly are two different tracks. If the president, if a particular zone gave the largest number of votes to the president, that election has been closed. This is now about electing National Assembly senators, where each state has the same number of senators, 3-3. So the senators themselves should not allow who gave more votes in the presidency to be clouded. We're not talking about appointing ministers. We're not talking about appointing secretary of government. These are appointees of Mr. President. So President-elect can decide to reward each state according to how they perform in constituting his cabinet. But National Assembly is not about who voted for who in the presidency. It should be about what do you need to do to complement whatever you have in the presidency. And secondly, which is important, he talked about corruption or baggages. Now, if the tone of this government will be to reduce perception and optics of corruption, then I think that should be a team. They should probably be looking at maybe persons who have no, whether proven or not proven, allegations in public domain. So
yeah, but allegations,
in politics, again, let me make that correction. When we talk about corruption, we're not talking about people convicted. If you are convicted, you should be in prison. But corruption is about perception and about allegation. So when I just say I've not been convicted, if you are convicted, you will be in prison. The fact is, if a person carries big stigma, it damages. Look, part of why Buhari failed in his anti-corruption was because the symbolism was dangerous. You cannot take persons who you think people perceive as not corrupt.
Dr. Sam, you might have to take that stigma all the way to the very top.
Yeah, that's the point. As I said, if the team of the government is to reduce on perception of, then you got to look for who is not. But it doesn't seem to me that this is even coming up in the discussion. Nobody's talking about corruption. The question then is who has the capacity, who can manage his colleagues collegially, who has the stature. And it seems to me, based on geopolitics, based on capabilities, based on social capital, it looks like the front runners will be Orji Sokalo, Baibio, and with some, far thought, maybe a fresher, like maybe Adam Oshomole, leveraging on stature as a former chairman, and then, of course, it's not so. Omahe is an interesting one. In terms of being a governor, he's done better than others. But the point is this. You also have to be a Senate president that commands some of support for their base. It looks like the Southeast people, especially with the case of Orji Sokalo, I say, look, to hell with this position, because you said we need to build bridges. You hear that in social media. Okay, it's time to build bridges. So it might be that the pendulum of popular support from the zones might be that Babio will have stronger control of his zone, which is the South-South. In the Southeast, most people in the streets are not paying attention and don't seem to care whether Orji Sokalo or Isnoso gets it. Maybe the governors in those states may rally up. But so as it is, we're going to see a play around strong party institutions, the preference of the president, the preference of the senators, and sadly, big money may play a role here on the floor of National Assembly. We've seen experience where on the floor of National Assembly, money could, tilt the pendulum towards one direction or another.
Let's bring in Sumner. Sumner, you've heard, I want you to react, but again, quickly to also add this to the equation, and it has to do with politics, which is the whole icing of what we're discussing here, how it pans out. A while ago, we spoke with Akin Alabi, who also said, well, sometimes they just might be looking at the region that has given the political party, the ruling party, more votes, talking about numbers.
Thank you. Let me start by reacting to what Dr. Sam Amadi had said about what usually happens on the floor of the Senate on the day that the proclamation is being read. On the day of the proclamation, which is usually at 10 a.m. on a given date, specifically this time around is going to be on June 13, there will be no senators on that day. Everybody will be a senator-elect. And so the only person who will apply the rules is the presiding officer that is in the capacity of the clerk of the National Assembly. The Constitution is very, very specific. When you read that section, after section 50 going downwards, it says that there shall be a clerk of the National Assembly, and he will be there, and he is the one who will decide to read the Constitution and not the rule book of the Senate. So the senators, because the senators elect, because they are not yet senators, cannot adopt any rule book or the statutory functions of the Senate at that time, because there's no guiding law. It is only the Constitution. So it is only when they become senators that have been sworn in that they can now adopt the statutory book. That's the rule book of the Senate. And so that can be very, very sketchy at times, because it's the clerk of the National Assembly that will provide direction. And so whatever he comes to say at that time, because they've not been sworn in, he takes the decision himself. It's only when they are sworn in that they cannot have a say. So it's a very dangerous trend. And when we go to the issues that you have raised now, it's very clear at this point in time that one other factor that he mentioned is going to play a critical role is the issue of money. A lot of lobbying will be ongoing, and then people want to use the influence of the president-elect. But the president-elect is being careful. Look, if we are to go to the floor of the Senate at this point in time now and vote, I can tell you that Barau Jibrin is pulling a lot of weight himself, and people like Akpabio. But Barau Jibrin is playing a lot of weight, and he comes from the Northwest, which you have just made an assertion that the zone which contributed so much to the election of the president should actually have a say. But Dr. Sam Amadi also corrected that notion that this is not a general election. This is an election for the senators to make. We are already done with the general election. So if that is the case, we must allow the senators to understand what the federal character of our government should look like. Because it's because of these dynamics that we said, we as a nation, we're going to give ourselves a federal character principle, so that we do not have one geopolitical zone lording it over everyone. The Northwest should be careful not to use the political and voting strength of that region to intimidate other people. Despite the fact that it contributed so much to the emergence of the president-elect, it must understand that we have a nation to run. And so senators-elect from that part, we are hearing that they are meeting with governors, both outgoing governors and incoming governors-elect, to say that no, they must produce the next Senate president. The appeal is to them to understand that we have a nation to run and not to use their voting strength to overwhelm other parts of the country. In the Southeast, why don't we consider, for example, the issue of adopting the zoning principle that we had in 1999 when we had a similar situation? President from Southwest, Vice President from the Southeast, from the Northeast, and then scaling it down. So in actual sense, if we follow some of those principles, it could be very helpful to us. But I can tell you right now that some people are warming themselves up to those from the Northwest because they are afraid that if they do not pamper to them, they can cause problems for the incoming government. And the president-elect has even been told by some governors to stay away, that this is not an executive thing, it's a parliamentary thing, that if he decides to go on zoning, there's going to be a problem. I think those threats are coming too early for the president-elect, and Bola Tinubu needs to put his foot on the ground, because as a senator in the aborted Third Republic, he had to step down his own position for others too, because if not, he could have emerged as the Senate president himself, because he belonged to the same camp with Yochia Ayu, and they all decided that in the interest of the country, they were going to take the rightful decisions. Let them take the decisions that will be rightful and acceptable to other parts of the country at the moment.
Very well said, Sumner Sambo. Words that should be cast in stone. Sumner Sambo is Arise News Editor. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, Dr. Sam Amadi, brilliant contributions from both of you gentlemen.